Uh, what is your definition of vulnerability?
Yeah, I'm gonna borrow heavily from Brene Brown because it has had such an impact on my life. And if you're listening to this and somehow you don't know who Brene Brown is, jump on the old Google machine, get on YouTube, and check out her number one video has got like 98 million views or
Yes.
just something ridiculous, right? Um, Vulnerability is literally the definition of the act of being brave. It is the act of being courageous. When you pull that back, um, a couple of layers. I mean, it's the original root in Latin is vulnus, like all the way to old Latin, not newer Latin, but old Latin is vulnus, and it's not even to open yourself up to like to open yourself up to wound. It's literally you're being wounded. And that's the original root. And when you pull it forward, many people I think of it in the context of you're opening yourself up to being harmed, but it's not. You are being harmed by doing it. But the growth and the movement forward that provides, and that's why it is so brave to do it, because you're literally allowing yourself to be wounded, and the growth that occurs from that more often than not is totally worth it. It's worth the pain.
Welcome to the Leading with Vulnerability podcast. I'm your host, Yuma Barnett, and today I've got me a Semper Fi fellow, a Marine to the podcast, a MARSOC veteran, somebody I'd like to call a close friend, but we've never actually met each other. But I feel like we have kind of a bond through what we did in the military and what we did in transition out of the military and what he does now. His name is Michael Halterman. He goes by Halty, and that's what I'll be referring to him as. I'm not going to occupy the mic and try to tell you everything about Halty. I'll pass it over to him. He can introduce himself and we'll get on with this conversation.
Dude, Yuma, thank you so much for having me on. And yeah, brother, I do claim you as your brother, because we did some transition stuff together, man. That is not easy. And even though we weren't on a same team in SOF, we chewed probably a lot of the same dirt and chased some of the same individuals, no doubt. But thank you so much for having me on. And so, by way of introduction, who the heck is this guy, right? Who am I? Um, I was born and raised in a small town on the central coast of California. Grew up skateboarding, playing soccer. Mom didn't want me to get hit in the head, so I played a lot of soccer, not football. Um, Climbing trees, hiking mountains, and doing all of those things. And I got to, I grew up pretty adventurous, and I got to the end of like high school, and I kind of realized very quickly that going into community college, being a bad student did not, no one's going to push you through and just let you keep going like they did in high school. So I failed community college very quickly. And then it was kind of like my life blew up. I'm a small town kid. I just failed college. I'm working a roofing job or several construction jobs. What the heck am I going to do? And I had a couple of buddies who had joined the Marine Corps, and they looked like they were having a great time. And so I went down and visited them. They were just down the coast in Camp Pendleton, and it didn't look like they were having a great time. They were. Like
Yeah.
they were having a fantastic time. And yeah, the Marine Corps in the late '90s in San Diego was a really big adventure for a small town kid. So I thought I'd join my friends. And so I jumped into boot camp and did all the usual things. The only thing I did different than them was I went into the infantry because I'm dumb. My friends are smart, but I like carrying heavy things uphill apparently. And so I did a bunch of that for the first 10 years. And then I found myself right time, right place, total luck, and honestly, a lot of preparation. Right when MARSOC started on the West Coast, and I was able to jump in and do the next 10 years, so 20 years total, and 10 of it in the infantry and then 10 special operations.
Awesome. Great intro, Mike or Halty. But we're going to dig into each one of those things that you brought up there. And the first thing I want to kind of
Yeah.
dig into is the Marines. So when I think of the Marines, I think of California.
Mm,
A lot of guys from Texas in the Marines, but it seems like it's kind of a family thing out there in California. Joining the Marine Corps, ran into a lot of Marines from California.
mm.
What what was it that kind of led you to the Marine Corps? If somebody out there today is thinking, about joining the service, what about the Marine Corps appealed to you?
Yeah. I would say, and I appreciate that you asked the question that way because it changes over time. And the reason I joined is not the reason I stayed. And the reason I stayed to 20 is not the same reason when I was at the 10-year mark and trying to, am I going to continue? So my original reason for joining was I knew, being a small town kid without an education, I had instantly put myself in a bucket with not a lot of opportunities. On top of that, it was the first time I realized all the things my parents and grandparents have been trying to tell me. You don't have any discipline. You don't have any follow through. Like, you work your butt off on a construction site, but everywhere else, you're a hot mess. Um, and what I saw looking from the outside of the Marine Corps, what I saw in that culture was the rigidity, the all the things that I felt like I couldn't solve on my own, and my parents were trying like heck to help me solve. I thought maybe if I joined the Marine Corps, I could solve those things and have a heck of like a great adventure, right? Have a great adventure.
Right.
And it's also part of why I chose going into the infantry. Like, I really wanted to do something hard. And so it's really like a calling of what's the hardest challenge I could possibly accept right now. And so it was probably a combination of those things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if I wasn't going to join the army, I would have probably definitely joined the Marines. The
Mm.
dragon slaying commercials back, in the
Yeah.
day, they had
Yeah.
the best recruiting ads ever, and they're
Yeah.
still up there in my opinion. When I see the Marine Corps on there, it just looks cool. Looks like it's something you would want to do. So you spent 11 years, 9 or 11 years, in the conventional side of the Marines.
I did about 10 years,
10 years,
about
okay.
10. Yeah.
So those 10 years in the Marine Corps, what were those 10 years like? What they look like for you?
Yeah. I I got super lucky because, I'm a California kid, like I talked about. And the first thing the Marine Corps did was like, oh, cool, you're from California. You're heading to North Carolina for 5 years.
That's right. That's right.
Like,
Welcome to the
oh, you're
military.
comfortable here? Oh, let's get you out of your comfort zone, kid. Private, PFC, Lance Corporal. And so and the Marine Corps was trying this new thing, at least at the time. It was new at the time. Who knows what they're doing now? But they essentially sent my entire School of Infantry class, so like 300 guys, all together to the same unit at the same time. So they were trying to do like instant cohesion, so that you've already done 3 months with all these guys, and now you should kind of know each other. And so it was a big chunk. And then, well, it wasn't quite 300. It was probably like 75 to 100 from the West Coast, which was my class, and then 75 to 100 from the East Coast. And we all dumped in at the same time underneath, like corporals, sergeants, staff sergeants who had been around for a while. Um, so it created instant cohesion, and especially for me being, quote, a West Coast guy, um, I found myself, kind of hanging out with all the other guys from like New Mexico and Arizona and all of the, West Coast kind of stereotypical places. And we'd be the ones kind of hanging out in the barracks on like the long holiday weekends and things like that, because our family wasn't nearby and we weren't going home to Virginia or wherever else where all the East Coast guys were. So like I had a lot of bottles of wild turkey on Thanksgiving, with my
Yeah.
West Coast buddies. Not
Yeah.
saying that's right now, but that's what happened, right? So
Yeah.
we built a ton of camaraderie that way. And then as we got to know the East Coast guys, it made it became very obvious to me that it was the right thing for me, and I was going to be a 20-year guy. Like, I
Right.
kind of knew in the first 2 years, like,
Right.
and me and a couple of buddies were always the ones going, hey, there's the worst working party we can come up with. Who's gonna, like, we need volunteers. Me and my buddy would just be like, first, hands up, to the point where they're finally like, okay, you two idiots aren't allowed to volunteer anymore.
That's right. That's
And
right.
we're like, here we go. I've done something right.
Yeah, right. That's right. That's right. That's funny. Same stuff. I always said the Ranger Regiment was kind of the Marine Corps of the Army. That the same.
Yeah.
There's no the camaraderie. It's a smaller. The Marines is kind of a smaller organization than our sister forces. I definitely love the brotherhood of the Marine Corps and how it's kind of like once you're a 75th guy, you're always a 75th guy. It's the same thing
Yeah,
when I run into Marines out there wearing their Marine, their hats and everything. They just have a different esprit de corps about them than some of the other service members, and it's nothing against them. It's just the way it is. It's just the way it
sure.
is
Yeah,
as a Marine. So you're sitting there 10 years in, and then MARSOC
yeah.
it comes into play, which I think you come in at the beginning stages of MARSOC?
In terms of, so the command stood up in 2006, excuse me, and then the West Coast unit stood up in 2007, and I was there like February, March of 2007 when like
Yeah.
they literally traded over the. I was in the formation where they traded over the guidon from
Oh, okay.
um, first Force Reconnaissance to First Marine Special Operations
Right.
Battalion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what did that look like, right?
Mm,
Going from Force Recon to becoming a MARSOC, and I mean,
mm,
some of the stuff I heard, and I've heard in the past that I'd like you to clarify was the Marine Corps in general didn't really want to switch over. They didn't want to have a special operations face
mhm.
and say, kind of like every Marine is a Marine. We don't need to join the special operations community and fall under like the USASOC, JSOC umbrellas. What did that kind of look
Yeah.
like from your point of view during that transition?
Yeah, it was. I mean, all of that's correct. So Donald Rumsfeld turned to the SOCOM commander and was like, "Hey, what do you need?" As we're entering the early stages of the GWAT, and he said, I need more bodies, essentially. And oh, by the way, the Marine Corps is not giving up their fair share. Everyone else is giving up their fair share, and it's time for Marine Corps to do theirs. And so, he just turned to the commandant and said, "Make it happen. You have a year." Essentially, and that's how I've read it, and that's the distilled version. Obviously, there's a little more to it. The test unit was stood up. Det one. They went out under a Navy SEAL SOTF and crushed it. They did a great job, and they checked the box that Marines could be a part of SOCOM. And then it was okay. Now you've got X amount of time to stand up the unit. So then the command was started. The West or the East Coast units were started, and then the West Coast units were started. Um, and when I entered during that time frame, I knew from that very first standing that very first formation that I needed to up my game to a level that I had not attained, not even close. Because the other thing that happened in that formation, if I'm remembering correctly, was like I want to say 3 to 4 silver stars,
Oh yeah,
a half dozen bronze stars, um, and I want to say there was it, at least as many purple hearts. And I had already invaded. I was part of the invasion in 2003 in a conventional unit. I'd seen some stuff, quote unquote. Um, but this was just a whole, and like hearing those citations, I just realized that you've got to, Halty, you are not good enough as is. Like you've got a lot of growing to do. And so I got a lot of, I sought out mentorship. I tried to shut up and ask good questions and just be a sponge and listen as much as possible and not fail. I
right,
mean, that's the golden rule. You're not allowed to fail,
right,
you know? So I did a lot of that. And I was just very lucky in terms of the guys who had been in First Force Reconnaissance, who had cut their teeth at Ranger School and had gone to like Lurslick and all of these other schools, and had been doing this stuff for a decade or more, were willing to take me under their wing and say, "Okay, kid, like you get one shot. If you fail anything, basically just keep your stuff packed. And
yeah,
so we're going to send you to a school. If you fail the school, don't come back here. Your stuff's already packed. You're going to get orders to back to Big Marine Corps. Like, so just know that that's the conditions you're under." So that was my selection process. That was pre the selection process
oh wow, yeah,
um,
okay, cool,
for the unit. And the big piece for me was, okay, we're going to send you to sniper school, which I bring that up just because the last sniper school in the Marine Corps is being graduated, I think on
that's
the
right,
15th or something, 15th
yep,
next month, the very last one. So to be a hog and a part of that community and seeing it go away has a mixed bag of emotions on that one. But basically, pack your shit. If you pass this school, we'll let you go on deployment. but you're probably going to go back to Fleet Marine Force anyway because I was not a reconnaissance Marine. And they really just wanted to keep reconnaissance Marines because they had gone through a selection process um, and all of those things. So I at every phase of every day of every week, month, I was earning my place on the team, and that was just how it was.
Yeah. So, a lot of questions come to mind when you're speaking about all that, but I'm curious. So, when we get a new, enlisted, especially officers that come from conventional army to the 75th,
Mm, yeah,
they say the thing that surprised them the most about coming to the soft community was the speed at which we moved,
yeah,
to
yeah.
solve problems and have to do things. And it's just sometimes there wasn't lead up time, zero to little lead up time to accomplish tasks or missions. Did
Mm.
you notice that coming from the regular Marine Corps once you kind of got through and you're indoctrinated in MARSOC? Just this, was the speed different in the soft community compared to the regular Marine community?
Man, absolutely. It was telling. I think in the first month where I got to see the TEEP, the training execution and evaluation plan. I'm probably butchering what that actually is now, but we called it the TEEP. And it's essentially the next 18 months completely laid out for the unit and then for the teams and then down to the individuals. And then seeing what was built out for every individual. There was, as we call it in the military, there was no white space. It was
Right.
just back to backing schools, back to backing training. And then if at any time something popped up, things were still happening at embassies around the world, concerning security concerns and things like that. It would just like shift. How are we solving this problem? While you could have half your team or half your company at school in school's phase, or you could be right in the middle of your workup. And so yeah, the speed and tempo of all of it drastically ramped up.
Yeah, and I bring that up for a reason because it's going to parallel into our transition discussion. But that's what I talk
Mhm.
about when I'm talking to business people and people on the other side of the uniform that have no idea. And I tell them the value in the soft operator. I said it's the speed in which they can move if you just give them the leeway to do it, to do
That's
things
it.
in your business and organization, the stuff. And we're going to dig into that a little bit more as we go. So all of that time in uniform, conventional side, MARSOC. Question I ask everybody: what was your most challenging day in the uniform?
Yeah. So my most challenging day in the uniform is a challenging day in retrospect. It wasn't it wasn't a challenging day that day in terms of losing a teammate because you get it done, right? But it's been by far the most challenging day in retrospect because the realities of what could I have done more, survivor's guilt. I mean, you name it. I've had to ride the Kubler-Ross grief curve about all of that. Um, and I had never lost a teammate up to that point. Lots of injuries, lots of close calls, like all of those things. But you know, it was final mission. We're a month from going home, and we lost a guy, and I was the team chief. I was not out on mission. The team commander took the team out. So I was doing backside support, doing all the battle tracking, setting up the QRF and all of those things. And so all of those things played into I've struggled with that for years. And it's taken me at least this long to really kind of come to terms with it and settle it in my mind in many ways.
Yeah, my story is very similar. When my roommate was killed and I wasn't out there, right? I was back on the
Yeah.
job, and it's just I mean, it's hard the retrospect, you're right. I mean, you
Hmm.
try not to question yourself for situations you could have no impact on, but you still do. I still find myself doing it to this day. Sometimes,
Mm,
it's very difficult. It is very difficult. And I don't know if there'll ever be completely closure for me or for you. I think
mm,
that's part of it when you put on the uniform and do what we did for 20 plus years post 9/11. But
yeah.
obviously, it's not all bad. Some of the best
100%.
some of the best times of my life, the best times of my life were in the uniform. So on the flip side, what was your best day in uniform or something you look back on all the time fondly and get a good laugh out of?
You're having that deep belly laugh, like, where you're like you're like, your face hurts, right? Like, you've
Yeah.
been laughing so hard and so long, and it happens at the most, like, you can't even plan it, where it's just you especially I mean, it happened in the infantry, certainly, and I've made lifelong friends in the infantry. I'm still my best friend is from the infantry, um, but it happens so much in special operations. It can happen in the middle of a gunfight
Oh,
because
absolutely.
you're with a bunch of quick-witted, funny bastards
Yep.
who can make light of anything. And or moments in the team room where you start quipping movie quotes back and forth at each other. Like it's just, yeah, you cannot even explain what it's like to be in a team room with a group of individuals that you've probably spent the last 18 months doing a workup with. So you've already suffered together tremendously, and
Yeah.
then to be downrange together. I mean, there's nothing like that on the planet.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right. It's just being around. That's what when people ask me, do you miss Ranger Regiment? Because I'm right here, at Fort Moore, and I see the guys. I said,
Yeah.
I don't miss the training event that you're currently about to go do tonight.
Yeah, right.
That sounds terrible, but I do miss
Yeah,
just being in the lead up to that and the banter and the back and forth and the shit talk. Uh,
yeah,
it's you can't find it anywhere. If you brought somebody from the civilian world into that, they would think we were all crazy and not understand it, and we'd be an HR complaint walking. But some of the absolute best times of our lives, for
yeah,
sure. Um, we're gonna go transition to military transition and probably what you're doing now. But I can't believe I forgot. I missed the most important question of the day for the
yeah.
Leading with Vulnerability
I was
podcast.
wondering.
This
I was
is,
wondering.
I got to scroll in here on the iPad and I got too high there.
Yeah,
But what is your definition of vulnerability?
yeah. I'm gonna borrow heavily from Brene Brown because it has had such an impact on my life. And if you're listening to this and somehow you don't know who Brene Brown is, jump on the old Google machine, get on YouTube, and check out her number one video has got like 98 million views or
Yes.
just something ridiculous, right? Um, Vulnerability is literally the definition of the act of being brave. It is the act of being courageous. When you pull that back, um, a couple of layers, I mean, it's the original root in Latin is vulnus, like all the way to old Latin, not newer Latin, but old Latin is vulnus, and it's not even to open yourself up to like to open yourself up to wound. It's literally you're being wounded. So and that's the original root. And when you pull it forward, many people I think of it in the context of you're opening yourself up to being harmed, but it's not. You are being harmed by doing it. Um, but the growth and the movement forward that provides, and that's why it is so brave to do it because you're literally allowing yourself to be wounded, and the growth that occurs from that more often than not is totally worth it. It's worth the pain.
Mhm. Absolutely. The Brene Brown, couldn't agree more. I mean, go read it if you haven't read it. Listen to it, whatever. I've changed my life, right? Changed my life. Really
Yeah.
opened up my mind and there, and I love that. I love what you said there. I love everything you said. And I think it ties in perfect to what we're about to talk about.
Mm,
So after 20 plus years of service for you, you decided to transition out.
yeah.
Which isn't easy when you're at the E8 level and you're looking at more career in front of you, and you have all these people that still rely on you and still trust you and still want you to be part of the team. And then you feel very selfish when you step away. At least I did. I had to say I and me more than I've ever
Yeah.
said in my life. What led you? What made you make that decision? It's time to hang it up.
I think it's a combination of a few things. The orders had already been cut. I knew where I was going next, where I was going to be in the command. My next rank was all but guaranteed. I I had amazing leadership who were really investing in me and giving me opportunities to get to the next level. But ultimately, I realized at some point that the the system didn't love me.
Right.
It it doesn't actually even care about you. The individuals you're on teams with, man, they'll do anything for you. But the system, and there's a couple of events that happened, but that's was essentially where I got to. And my wife and I decided, this is probably the best opportunity to hang up the spurs. I'm still on a high point. Things are still pretty positive. Like this is a really good transition point. And I decided that in 2016, which was 2 years before my retirement in 2018.
Right.
So I gave myself runway in making that decision, and also trying to help. I was trying to do the right thing by the command too, of like, hey, like I'm going to be non-competitive for promotion. I'm not going to take these orders. Like I'm dropping my appendix J, and do all the right things. Right? Not well received. Doesn't matter how you do it. It is not well received.
Yeah, no
Um,
matter how much it's the system doesn't care about you, but when you care back about the system, it's almost like it works in reverse. It's like for and against
yeah,
you.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
But that's okay. That
yeah,
is
right.
okay. And so it was just it made 20 years. That's a great time to pop smoke, and it's time to go. And I felt much more comfortable because I saw at least three or four cohorts of like my peers ahead of me who I really looked up to, and started saying, "Hey, dude, like here's all the things you got to do in transition, but no matter what, like your min force for getting on the ground for this mission is THF. Like that's how you have to plan it. Like you need to plan all the other things. You got to have your pace plan, your QRF. You've got to work through admin logistics and all this. But min force for this mission is THF, and that was an absolute difference maker. And it ultimately helped me make a very, let's be honest, scary decision. Made it much easier.
Yeah, yeah. And we're gonna really dig into THF here in a second, but I'd just be curious, what challenge did you encounter maybe that was the most difficult or maybe the most surprising in your
Mhm.
transition? When I talk to people, it's always something a little bit different where they thought they were going to be able to walk out of the command sergeant major job into the C suite
Yeah.
or whatever it may be. They thought actually being home with the family was harder. Like that was they weren't ready for that. They didn't prepare for that. They were them and their spouse weren't ready for that. What challenge did you encounter that you can that really challenged you in the transition?
At some point, I realized that like there's a huge checklist, right? It's massive. Like if you just put all of the things you got to do to get out of the army, get out of your command, get VA claim done, get your medical done, figure out finance, like, and it just goes on and on, right? If you just made one giant list, probably, I don't know, 500, 800, 1,000 items, individual items you got to do. What I realized at some point was none of that is actually transition. And the realization hit me when those are all one and done events. It's change management is what you're actually doing with all of that. That is situational and it's contextual. You're going to change where you work. You got to find a new place to work. You need to now go get health insurance. All right, let's go figure that out. These are all one and done items you check the blocks on. Transition is what happens in your heart and in your head. It's identity, it's community, it's sense making, it's purpose, and it's meaning in life. And that shit does not happen overnight. That takes time, and it takes a lot of effort that is not on the checklist. And it takes a lot of look, I'm 5 years, I got a full enlistment in 1 year
Right.
as a civilian, right? And I'm just now really getting comfortable completely with Halty on the other side of not having a uniform, without
Yeah.
being master sergeant, without being sniper, without being free fall, like none of those, like reconfiguring all of that and being comfortable with it. So the real transition has nothing to do with the checklist. The checklist is mandatory. You've got to do it. It's necessary. but that's not transition. That's change management.
Yeah, you're right. It's the checklist items are easy, I think, for guys like us when we just, you
Totally.
know, finally put our heads down and actually do it, right? Because we
I'm
procrastinate
getting stuff done and I can
forever, right?
check it off and say,
Yeah. It's
yeah,
introspective look at yourself as a person and purpose
yeah,
and what you're gonna that is difficult. And I'm behind you a little bit. I'm 2 years into this transition thing.
mhm,
I know I still have some time in front of me to really to get it to fully be there, right? It's still
yeah,
difficult. There's still triggers, there's still things that uh it's still hard in a lot of aspects. But what I do is I
mm.
still pull out my Honor Foundation handbook that you guys got me, and I look at the notes in there and the stuff. I kind of get chills when I think about this stuff and what I went through with the Honor Foundation. But what is the Honor Foundation? What is THF? For somebody out there listening that might be about to transition.
It is a 3-month executive style education designed for all the SOF brothers and sisters. The prerequisite to get in is being in SOF. It's designed for us by us. It's 3-month executive style because we recognize you've got a challenging day job. Right? You're still at the regiment, you're still on a team, you're still on the debt, you're still at the STS, wherever you are in SOF. We want to get to you 18 to 24 months before you transition so that you have time to work on the stuff that's not on the checklist that I've already talked about. And it's 3 months long because like we've already said, like it takes time to really figure out your identity when the uniform comes off, the rank and titles go away. It takes it's gonna take longer than THF. I mean, it certainly has for me and pretty much all the alumni that I've had the privilege to talk to and work with. But it's a great starting place. And then we're also going to help you with the checklist, right?
Yep.
So phase one is all about you. Phase two is all about really doing the stuff to get in and through a hiring funnel. If you look at it from a 5,000 foot perspective, right? You got to do LinkedIn, you've got to do a resume, you've got to be able to have conversations um, without using a bunch of acronyms because people won't understand you. You got to know how to use use a business card, so on and so forth. And so we do all of those things because they, as I said before, they're necessary. It is part of it. And then phase three, the final month. So each of these is a month long, and then the final month is all about exposing you to opportunities. So now phase one, you know a little bit more about yourself. Phase two, you have some documentation to kind of back all of that up with your LinkedIn, your business cards, you're dressing well. And then phase three is exposure to industries and companies and businesses so that you've at least had one conversation or you've heard one person talk from entrepreneurship perspective, tech perspective, manufacturing, nonprofit, so on and so forth. And then you can start to listen for and find the thing that most resonates with you because you're going to go into it with preconceived ideas of I don't know. I'm going to go to JP Morgan Chase. I'm going to make 6 figures starting off. I'm going to work my way to 7 figures. I'm going to burn it down, burn the candle from both ends. And then you're going to have conversations with some people and realize that you don't necessarily have to do that. And you may not even want to be in that industry. Right. And that's just one example, nothing bad about JP Morgan Chase. It's just knowing fully what you're getting into before you just send it.
Right.
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 Do some intel gathering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I kind of attribute and liken Honor Foundation to like a selection process. Like just because you
Mhm.
got through RASP or MARSOC selection or BUDS doesn't really mean you know shit about the organization, but you kind of it set the standards, the discipline, and the runway and everything, your expectations going into it. It's kind of the same with THF. You're not gonna don't expect to walk out of there transitioned, if you will,
Right.
100% ready to
Yeah.
go. But I'll tell you what it did for me is without THF, I would have absolutely taken a GS something
Mhm.
shit job. I would have walked out of the office on Friday. I walked back into the same office on Monday in civilian clothes
Mhm.
and been absolutely miserable. And the
Mhm.
THF process helped me understand that's not what I needed to do. So I
Mhm.
think it's so much deeper than people realize. I cannot explain what THF and going through that can do for you as a person, helping you just understand you, right? And that
Mhm.
that comes through telling stories.
Yeah.
And
Just like we're doing right
storytelling,
now.
super important. Something we've done forever. Tribes,
Mhm.
going back. That's how we've storytelling is the reason I joined the military because I watched and read books of people telling
Yeah, right?
stories.
Yeah.
Storytelling is it's everything, and THF really emphasized the importance of it. Why is it so important, Alti?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, how do you actually get to know another human? How do you actually get to figure out at a basic level, can me and Yuma even get along with one another? Um, and it starts by just being vulnerable, sharing
Yeah,
a little bit about yourself. And that comes in the form that's how we do it. I mean, that's how the human biology or psychology, sociology of how we interact with one another. And it's the thing that we understand ubiquitously is in the human condition across the globe is we tell stories, and that's how we get it done.
yeah,
um, the other thing I would add is, you asked me, what is the Honor Foundation? In the amount of time that I spent talking about it, I barely grazed the very top of the tip of the iceberg. There is so much more to it. And I would say that, the last thing I'd like to say about it is we serve you for life.
that's
If you
right.
graduate with us, you are now an alumni for life. I was literally just on the alumni channel, and it was a buzz of 2,200 plus guys and gals across all of the soft tribes, now in various states of transition or in various companies across the country, sharing jobs, sharing opportunities, sharing. I'm starting my entrepreneurial thing. Hey, who's got a lawyer to help me with this? I'm starting my security company, or I'm looking for security folks to do, you name it. You instantly have a network of 2,200 and growing rapidly soft guys and gals that you can reach out to for just about anything that we're all grappling with, whether it's transition or business or other.
Yeah, you're right. One of the big things about THF, otherwise, talk to get a mentor, anything, they tell you networking. You got to network, network, network. If you go to THF, I mean, you're going to network. They're going to show you how to network, and then you're going to have a network forever that you can always
Yeah.
go back to. And like you said, it's hard to summarize what THF is and does in
Yeah.
a podcast episode because, like you said, for life, I can go. I tell people all the time, I'd sit down or I had a Zoom conversation with Michael Dell's head of HR. And they're like, "Oh,
Yes.
no, no, no. Michael Dell, like the computer that you're
Yeah.
talking to me on, his
Yeah.
head of
Yeah.
HR talked to me for well over an hour about strategy and things that she did in the HR community. And that's one person on the giant roster of people that you
Yeah.
have access to for the rest of your life if you want it.
Yeah.
And the other thing I want you to comment on a little bit is I tell people don't go to the Honor Foundation. There's going to be deliverables. Like if you don't
Hmm.
show up, if you don't do the work, you're not going to pass. They're
Right.
not going to graduate you, which I think is super important because A
Yeah.
typers like us, sometimes you got to hold us accountable, right? Especially
Yeah.
as senior
Yeah.
NCOs, we can put this on the back burner. But if you don't do, it's not hard. The deliverables aren't hard, but
Right.
you got to do it. You got to show up. You got to be present. Why is that so important with the THF motto or the way you guys do things?
Yeah, look, there is homework. You're gonna have to put in work. Look, and we don't need to know whether or not you can write a dissertation in 2,000 words on something. We're not looking to see if you can do linear algebra. That's not what it's about. It's really about digging into yourself. It's really about, do I even like the person I see in the mirror in the morning? It's
That's right.
really and answering a lot of those questions. And look, it sucks, and you can't click through it like you do annual training just so you get your cybersecurity cert. And even though you've got the cert in your hand,
Yeah,
and it
that's
doesn't
right.
mean shit because you just click through it as fast as you could and you didn't learn anything other than
Yeah.
don't click on buttons. Um, it's not like that's not what we're doing, right? So inside, if you bracket inside of those two things, those two extremes, somewhere in the middle, working on yourself.
So with that, Halty, how do people find THF? How do they apply for THF? What's the process look like?
Yeah, go to honor.org. That's honor.org. And just hit the I believe button, also known as apply. And that's it. If you're in special operations, look, it's free and it doesn't suck. It's going to cost you time. Certainly, but it's 100% free and it will be for your entire life.
Yep.
The last thing, I already said the last thing I'd say, but the last thing I'll say now is not only are we going to serve you for life, like we also understand that you have a hard financial position you're going to hit on your last day in uniform. And we're going to do everything we can to ensure that you are employed in something that is fulfilling your financial responsibilities. Because although that is on the thing we talked about, it's on the checklist, it's not transition, it's a necessary piece that we understand is bearing down on you and it's very real in your life. We get that. And so we're going to absolutely work with you to make sure that you are as close and as capable to landing on your feet financially at the right company that embraces you for you, allows you to grow, and not take a shit job that you're just like, well, I can contract and make a shit ton of money.
That's right.
I'll get back to my kids in 2 more years when I'm done doing rotations in wherever I stand.
That's right.
You have more choices than that. Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. You guys hear me all the time beating the horse about the THF. Uh, at least look into it. At a minimum, look into it. And if it's not for you, that's okay. But please do something else in the transition space other than your mandatory
Mhm.
military transition classes because you're going to need it. I promise. And the last question I ask everybody is if you could go back and talk to that private first class Halterman, what would you tell him? What advice would you give him?
2 things. Um, the amount you're drinking right now is going to crush you later on in your career. And it's going to have deleterious effects all the way through your soft career because you're going to degrade your ability because you're not going to sleep well. You're not going to adapt well in relationships. You're going to fly off the handle with anger because alcohol is ruining your ability to be a better teammate. That'd be the first one. And the second one would be, look, dumbass, save some money.
Yeah.
Because you never know when you're going to have to get out, right? There could have been a medical situation where you're like, hey, you're on the short track. You were staying in for however long. Guess what, man? You're done. Or I could have decided to get out at 10 years or whatever. All of that is predicated, a good transition, the good checklist is predicated on having financial stability.
Yeah.
Because when you come to the end, regardless of how you get there, whether it's a med board or or honorable after 20 or whatever that looks like, if you're not financially ready, you're going to substantially, like, order of magnitude increase how hard and stressful and anxiety ridden your transition is going to be. So figure out your finances.
Yep. Absolutely. I feel like you're talking to Private Barnett as well. He could use some of that advice. But Alti, appreciate your time. And I say this to, and it means I think it hope it means more. Thank you for your service, first of all,
Thank you, brother.
from another service member, and thanks for what you're doing now. I think it's making an impact. We see it every day. I really I mean that. I appreciate what you do. Um, Thanks for coming on the show. And everybody out there listening, make sure you like, you subscribe. I'm so close to 500 subscribers on the YouTube. Help me out.
Yes.
And we'll catch you all next week. Thanks, Alti.
Thank you.